Hello, Vika. Happy to see you.
Thank you, David. I'm happy that I have a possibility to ask you some questions, which are collected from our Russian students. And I think it will be a very good bridge between you and the Russian student, as well as other students. Yeah.
Good.
Some questions are general, some are more practical. And I hope that we'll have enough time.
Okay.
Yeah. But don't be surprised, some of these questions are quite naive.
That's okay.
Yeah, okay. So the first question, how do you see the main goal of psychotherapy?
The main goal of therapy.
Yeah. In general and biosynthesis
To help
specifically.
a client move from his problems to his resources.
Okay.
I see that as the main goal.
Okay.
So that he can lead his life in a way that's satisfying and become his own therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And therapist means taking care of your life.
Yeah.
That's what the word therapy means, taking care.
Yeah.
So the therapist helps him to take care of his own life, using his resources, and then he doesn't need a therapist
Yeah.
because he's become his own carer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How do you see the development of psychotherapy in future? What place will it take among other social institutes?
That's really not a question for me because it's a psychopolitical question. The EAP has been fighting for years to get psychotherapy recognized in the health professions and so on, and especially that psychotherapy is not limited to psychologists and doctors.
Mm-hmm.
But what the future will be, we have to wait and see, because the European community is quite slow in responding to things. And but maybe gradually body psychotherapy will get more recognized and will get more accepted, and therefore will grow more in the culture.
Mm-hmm. We hope.
We hope.
Let us cross our fingers.
Yes, we hope.
Yeah.
But I'm not a prophet.
Mm-hmm. Another?
Yeah?
How do you see the main difference between your system and other system for body sex? How do you see it now?
Okay. Well, in a new book that's just come out, a huge book called Body Psychotherapy by Michael Heller,
Yeah.
which is a very interesting book. He does not understand what biosynthesis means. He thinks it means integrating other systems, and it doesn't. So the integration in biosynthesis is an integration of the three life streams, which some other schools have developed from us, but it was our original concept. So one difference is that we have this particular perspective, which was like the origin point of biosynthesis, and have developed that over 30 years or so. Maybe the major difference is that Reich himself worked cathartically, and that was very good for people who were very armored or very repressed with strong egos, but it was not good for borderline people. But Reich was able to work with cathartic states in very good contact. And some of the people who came after him forgot about the contact and emphasized the catharsis. And this led to re-traumatizing of people who had weak egos, who could not stand the flood of the feelings. So this became a paradigm shift in biosynthesis in the early 1970s, where Stanley Kellerman and I independently, but in parallel, put out this view that we have to have containment and catharsis in balance. And too much containment, you need more opening, more expression. And too much expression, you need more containing and digesting. So I think the major difference is that some of the other body psychotherapy schools have understood this and are moving in the same direction, so they are congruent with us. And others are still in this old paradigm which has problems. And one book I can specially recommend, which is very congruent with how we work, but not coming from us at all, is the book Trauma and the Body by Pat Ogden.
Pat Ogden.
And she's from the Hakomi school, but she's developed her own system called sensory motor psychotherapy. And this is very parallel to what we are doing, but our approach didn't learn from her, her approach didn't learn from us, but it's very congruent. So I have a warm feeling towards this particular approach. But of course, many of the other approaches, we have overlaps, we have places of agreement, and often we have places of disagreement. I give an example of a disagreement with radix and a disagreement with the Boyerson system. In radix, they emphasize always keep the eyes open all the time. And this is emphasizing one polarity and shutting out the other. And this I disagree with. And in Gerda Boyerson's work, which I respect greatly, it has many good qualities, but one aspect is that some of the therapists say when there's strong anger, close the eyes, then the therapist doesn't see the bad feelings. It protects the therapist, but it's not good for the client. So these are two extremes. Always keep the eyes open. Close the eyes open in highly charged states, which I disagree with. But we have many areas of similarity and some areas of difference. But the main thing I would emphasize is this paradigm shift and the life field model, life stream model. And of course we have the life field model, which is unique to biosynthesis. But yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next question. Being a life system, biosynthesis is in a process of constant development.
I hope so.
Does biosynthesis have a tendency now to move more towards spiritual and psychological psychotherapy, or more to healing work?
What's the difference?
I see a difference between them. Who is subject, who is object? For me, in psychotherapy, both client and therapist are working together.
Yes.
And healing, for me, more in healing process, client is more receiving.
Yes, I got it. I got your question.
Yeah.
We teach the view therapy means care and cure.
Yeah.
So body psychotherapy is care and cure of the body and the soul.
Yes.
The care comes from outside. That's the empathic contact from the therapist.
Yeah.
The healing, the cure, actually comes from inside. So I don't believe that we therapists can heal our clients. I think we can create a caring environment within which the client can heal. When you talk about are we going more spiritual, I'd say we have always been spiritual.
Yeah.
But the most important thing is the integration of spirit and body and mind.
Yeah.
That we don't get too physical and forget the essence. We don't get too meditative and forget daily life and expression. It's always a process of what we call translating up and translating down.
Yeah.
So we're not getting more, hopefully not more of one. We are hopefully expanding the connection between the two.
Yeah.
So it's a psycho-neuro-immuno process.
Yeah. Thank you. You speak a lot of resources, and yesterday you told that a couple of years ago you had the whole 7-day seminars.
Some years back. We have another one in 2 years' time.
but still I have a questions. How and where you can find, you can help your client to find or to create resources?
Okay. The resource is something which is helping.
Yeah.
The problem is something which is tying knots and blocking. So there are positive aspects which are actually helpful, but often the client doesn't notice them.
Yeah.
And there are negative aspects which he's very aware of and maybe which dominate in his consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave examples in the training of people with massive handicaps,
Yeah.
and how they manage to find meaning in life in spite of the big handicaps. So the resources may be resources in the body. There may be resources in imagery. There may be resources in the outer world, relationships. There are many different sources of resources. Mm-hmm. But in the session, there are resources in the session, and there are resources which are out of the therapist's control outside the session. So the outer resources the client has to find himself, mm-hmm. and the resources which are present in the session, the client may not be aware of,
Yeah.
but the therapist can help to discover them, and then make the client aware of them. And sometimes it's just a simple gesture, a positive gesture. I'll give an example. A client many years ago was lying on the mattress and complaining about her mother. And she complained how much her mother restricted her and blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And as I was watching this, I saw a little body movement in one foot, just a little turning. And I asked her to pay attention to this foot. And the foot was a resource. And then this foot came more alive and the legs became more alive. And then she had a new memory. So the new memory was a resource coming from the foot. The new memory was her mother helped her to dance. Her mother supported her dancing.
Dancing.
So this was now a positive memory from the mother. Mm-hmm. So she got the aliveness in the foot, the memory of the dancing, a reminder of her vitality, and then the connection that the mother, in spite of her difficulties, had supported her in this particular area. Mm-hmm. And this changed her view of her mother. It wasn't all black now, it was partly black and partly light.
Yeah.
Now, that's just one little example from just a small movement. I give another example, also from the feet. Mm-hmm. Also a woman lying, different country, different time, and she's lying with one foot turned out, no movement. Mm-hmm. So I looked at this asymmetry and I thought, I work with the polarity, so I went to this foot and I turned it like this.
Yeah.
So it's my action, but I'm getting it from the asymmetry of the client's feet. When I did that, the client started to do this. Mm-hmm. Then she burst into tears and a lot of emotion came. Then came the story that she had polio as a child in this leg.
Yeah.
And the right side had said, I don't want to know about this weakness. This is weak, no good, and we don't know, don't want to know. So as she's doing this, she's reconciling the right and left side, and she's accepting that this weak side is okay and can be nourished. Mm-hmm. So it's a resource. Yeah. This is a resource, and even this is a resource. And that wasn't coming from a movement, that was coming from a position.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have a resource in an image, like we saw this week in the training, with images coming up in meditation, which then becomes valuable in the whole of the person. Mm-hmm. So many different places to find resources.
Yeah. Thank you. Are there special theories of personality which you use in biosynthesis?
Other theories, already existing theories, you mean?
Or maybe which you created in biosynthesis? Or are there special theories of personality which you recommend to use?
Well, our main theory of personality is in fact the life field model.
Yeah.
Because that's the whole person. And this has been developed ever since I came to Switzerland, maybe a little bit before, but mainly since I came to Switzerland. So Silva and I developed that together from 1985 onwards, so that's 27 years, I think. Long before, when I was a student, I just finished my degree in education. I was asked to be teaching. I had a tutorial role in seminars for students, education students. And of course, education links with psychology. And there I was impressed with the work of Maslow. And I taught Maslow's motivation theory. His main book is Motivation and Personality. And it's interesting that my son, who is just studying neuropsychology now, has just discovered Maslow. So we're coming back to the roots, if you like, of a very congruent personality theory. And Maslow had a hierarchy of 5 levels of personality, starting with the body and finishing with the essence. And then later on, other students of his enlarged it to 7 or 8 levels. And there was no conscious connection when we developed the life field model. There was no conscious connection with Maslow, but it is congruent.
Yeah.
So if you want to look at another personality theory, Maslow is a good place to go. Beyond that, there are so many personality theories. Freud had his personality theory. Reich had his personality theory. Congruent with Reich and developed from Reich is the theory of 3 layers: a tertiary layer of the personality, the secondary layer, and the primary. That's directly taken from Reich and is congruent with Reich. Freud, there are many problems with his personality theory. I don't go into them now. Jung, a lot of problems with his personality theory. So I'm happy with Maslow.
Okay.
Happy with Reich. Happy with biosynthesis.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you use any ideas of character structures in biosynthesis now?
Yes.
Or you see it as a kind of old-fashioned idea?
Okay, good question. Character, the word character comes from the Greek, karasein, and it means conditioning.
Conditioning?
Yes.
Yeah.
So character patterns are patterns of conditioning. And some patterns of conditioning are negative, they're restrictive, they block us. And some patterns of conditioning are very helpful and supportive and social growth. So character can be positive or negative. When it's positive, we call it character styles.
Yeah.
Character styles is a good name.
Yeah.
And when it's difficult, we call it character blockages or character armoring.
Bottom.
One difference with the Lowenian model is that we see a character tendency as something in the person. We don't see the person as in the character tendency. So we say to somebody, okay, maybe there's a masochistic tendency, but we don't say he's a masochist. So we don't nominalize the character tendencies. We say this is a tendency within a person. And any one person can have any particular mixture of all the main character tendencies. So this is a very refined model in biosynthesis, because we work with the concept of polarity, like too much in or too much out, too much up or too much down. And there are 8 of these polarities, which gives us 16 character tendencies. So it's very, very differentiated. And all of these can be small or large influences, and they can be healthy or unhealthy. So we're looking at patterns of, let's stay with the word tendencies, we're looking at tendencies within people to be more out or more in or more up or more down or more forward or more backward. And sometimes these tendencies are very helpful in certain life situations, sometimes they're very unhelpful. So we try to work with unfreezing the tendencies so they can flow in helpful ways in the right direction at the right place in the right time. So you become in a way, you start to own your character. Your character becomes an expression of who you are. So your character then blossoms, it flowers. And otherwise a character pattern may be like a closed blossom that doesn't have nourishment. It can be sticking in the way, it can be blocking you. So there are some similarities with other systems. Reich's system of character, which was very important when he developed it. And Reich looked at character in the body, which nobody else had done before. And then Lowen got it rather simplistic. He had 5 character patterns, not tendencies, patterns, and he called them structures. And then he saw, okay, he's oral, he's masochistic, he's psychopathic, and that's get very oversimplistic. And at the end of his life, Lowen gave up the character. He said it's too, he recognized it's too limiting, too restrictive a model. So we're working with this expanded model of the character tendencies.
Thank you very much. Next. You have this concept of motor fields.
Yes, motoric fields.
Motoric field. If a client got stuck in some particular motor field, does it necessarily mean that because of this, this client create a kind of specific muscular or visceral armor? Well, or it's not necessary?
If he's getting stuck, it will be a particular kind of muscular or visceral armoring. Otherwise he wouldn't be stuck. But let's take the flexion field as one example. Flexion field, you are closing in, you're getting smaller. And this can be positive or negative. It's positive if you need to get smaller because perhaps you're going to bed at night and you want to keep warm, so you flex your body. It's got a healthy function. Or the yoga posture of the child, it's relaxing. So the flexion field can be very helpful, positive, or it can be a permanent contraction where you shrink away from expression. And then it's got this visceral armoring aspect. So if we've got a person in the flexion field, the first thing the therapist does is look, is this helping the client at the moment, or is it a typical contraction pattern? If it's helping the client, you leave it. You watch the breathing. You're just giving it attention with what we call pregnant waiting. That means sooner or later it's going to emerge the other way because the client is in good contact. So it's a contact high flexion field. Or you look at it and you realize it's a contact low flexion field. The client could stay there for the rest of the session. And then you're trying to help him in various ways to unfreeze the flexion and get more expansion, more the opposite side. So that's true with all the fields. But you do that gently. You don't force him into the opposite. You're trying to gently invite the client to take the risk of what happens if he undoes a bit of the flexion and gets a bit more expansion.
So it's invitation.
Step by step, invitation. But that's the direction your therapy is trying to go. If he's stuck in one of these motoric fields.
What is special in therapeutic contract in biosynthesis?
The contract.
If we compare it with the contract in other approaches, what is special for biosynthesis?
I don't know that our contract is especially different from other people's contracts. The basics of a contract are the therapist gives his time, the client pays for the therapist's commitment of time, and there are certain ethics. There's an ethics of the relationship. The ethics are visible to the client, so part of the contract is the right to say no to touch. It's not that you have to be touched. So the contract is there to protect the therapeutic relationship, give it a secure frame. I don't know that anything especially different. Maybe the main difference is touch, because therapists that don't work with touch don't need a contract about that. And when I say contract, I don't necessarily mean something written. I mean an agreement.
Yeah.
So because touch is frightening to some people, it's very important that the client recognizes as an adult early in the therapy that touch is an option from the therapist, but the client can always say no. And what I have found in practice is that many times when a client says no to touch, I say to him, which kind of touch do you not want? And then we detotalize it. Then maybe the client says, I don't want any touch on the front, on the back is fine.
Okay.
Then he says yes to some kinds of touch. So he sets the conditions. So in that way, he makes a kind of contract. And I have one classic example about this. A woman who received very light touch from not a biosynthesis therapist, another system. The light touch was in principle very good, but for this client, it took away her boundaries.
Yeah.
Then she went pre-psychotic. Then I did a session with her trying to repair the problem, and I asked her what triggered the psychosis, and she said this very, and I gave her my arm, and she showed on my arm this very light, fluttery touch, which is good for me because I have strong boundaries, but wasn't good for her at all. And then I said to her, listen to the question, what kind of touch do you think would have helped you? And she said, like this. And she did it on me. And then I did it back on her. And this was bounding, making touch that was helping to make boundaries. So we were negotiating in this little session which kind of touch was helping her to compensate for the difficult touch which had actually triggered a psychosis.
Yeah.
So strong stuff around touch. But it's important that the adult in the client can say yes or no, and how much and when to stop.
So this is an important part of the contract.
Very important part of the verbal contract.
Yeah.
Yeah, the verbal agreement.
If you have a client who takes a medicine prescribed by a medical doctor, psychiatrist, etc.,
Yes.
We have to take into consideration that all his reactions
Yes.
are affected by this.
Yes.
Do you work together with this medical doctor or what?
I give an example of there where a client had some kidney problems and she was on some medication from the doctor.
Yeah.
And when I find examples of that, I always say, is there anything the doctor says you should not do, or any advice the doctor gave you to avoid something?
Yeah.
And then I go rather carefully with these medical conditions. Same with migraine, same with other physiological conditions that are treatable by doctors, mainly usually psychosomatic complaints.
Yeah.
And then I ask the client, what does the doctor tell you, what you should do or not do? Especially if we're doing standing work and somebody has a back problem, then we're going very carefully. What does the doctor say is possible and not possible? What does your back say is possible and not possible?
Yeah.
So it's a kind of dialogue, not directly with the doctor, but indirectly with the doctor through the client. If a client is taking antipsychotic kind of pills, like whatever it is, stuff rebalancing the emotions medically, that creates a lot of difficulty.
Yeah.
Because if, for example, somebody is depressive and is on antidepressive medication, then you're not going to probably get to crying, and the emotions are reorganized by the chemistry.
Yeah.
And this can make it much more difficult for the therapist to work. So we just have to recognize the limits of psychiatric medication, antidepressants and so forth, which can make it more difficult for the therapist to reach the real feelings. Because there's now not only the character patterns and the history, but the current medicine on top.
Yeah.
At the same time, if you have, let's say, a manic depressive client without medication, it's also very difficult to work.
Yeah.
So sometimes what you can do with a client on medication, if they learn to trust and get some trust in the body process and the therapeutic process, they might try a little reduction in the medicine. And maybe talk with their doctor, get consent for that. And then you reduce the medicine if the client and the doctor are willing, and maybe a little bit more emotion comes and you work a little bit more freely, and then perhaps the client gets more trust and reduces the medicine more. But it's a very careful process. So, but it's very important the client declares this, that you know, the therapist knows if the client is taking particularly psychiatric medication. But also it's good to know if there's physical stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Like you yourself were talking about this history with your back and your legs and the medical treatment. So it's good to know that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. If we have a client who is spoiled by many years of cathartic work.
Oh.
And, for example, holotropic breathing system.
Holotropic breathing, are we coming to that?
Something like this. And because of this client is very resistant to any other kind of therapy.
Well, then he won't come, will he?
I don't know, but he comes.
Okay.
What do you recommend?
My strongest example was a man in London who had holotropic breathing. And he got hyperventilating, and he couldn't get out. And he was in a 2-day group with me. And he said, if I don't get out in 6 months, I kill myself. So I had 2 days to help him get out. Otherwise, we have the risk 6 months later he won't be there. And so I taught him what I know, how to get out of hyperventilation states, which is not difficult. And he learned that in 2 days, and he's still alive. So the holotropic breathing is very controversial.
Yeah.
Some people can cope with it and get into their feelings and their imagery in good ways, and some people just go over the edge.
Yeah.
But it's too risky because you're playing with the blood chemistry, and hyperventilation changes the blood chemistry in about 5 minutes, and then it becomes as strong as if you take a drug, which changes the blood chemistry. So it's a kind of addiction for some people, or for some therapists. And if a client goes to a therapist addicted to holotropic breathing, some of these clients will get in a bad place.
Yeah.
And others will find it okay. So we never work with holotropic breathing. And if we have clients who've had things from other therapies which are negative for them, we are trying to educate the other way. I'll give another example. A therapist trained in bioenergetics, the old system, was over-provoking clients in this room. And he was a biosynthesis student, but he was over-provoking. So I said to him, stop. You may have done that in bioenergetics, but you can't do that here. And then I teach the students, if they've learned things from other methods, some things are congruent, then that fits in, you can do that as well. And some things are the opposite. And what is the opposite you cannot do in the training. What you do outside in your practice is the therapist's responsibility. But the client can't practice in the session on my students a method which is the opposite of what we teach. If it's congruent with what we teach, no problem. Years ago, I was in Denmark, and I had Grof's brother-in-law in my group, the brother of his wife, in my group as a biosynthesis 4-day group. And we had an argument in the group about holotropic breathing. I said my stuff, he said his. That's okay. I said, you have your opinion, I have mine. But then what he did was, when they made the small groups of 3 or 4 people, they went into the upstairs, one of the upstairs bedrooms. It was a residential group.
Yeah.
And they worked for 3 hours with one of the group members doing holotropic breathing. She got in a crisis. Next day, I have to deal with the crisis. I said to him, listen, you can have a different theory from me. That's okay. But if you practice the opposite of what I teach in my group, you don't belong here. So this is one of the very few people I threw out of the group. Stanislav's brother-in-law, exit. And then we had to repair this woman who was all over the place. Yeah. So this was a little bit, maybe a lot with your story of somebody who had to I won't go into it. Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes we discuss with our clients different rights.
Rights.
Right to exist,
Yes.
right to express their needs.
Yes.
Have you ever discussed with your client the right to die, right for death?
Okay, very interesting question. Very important existential question. I'll give you an example of the strongest way this came up for me in a moment. But this, of course, is a political issue. It's an exit strategy in Switzerland, which is legally possible to help somebody who wants to die. But in terms of clients, of course, I don't want my clients killing themselves.
Of course.
It's not good for my reputation. So this is part of the contract.
Yeah.
That if a client has suicidal feelings or suicidal wishes, the contract is you don't act them out while the therapy lasts. If you want to take your life, first you end the therapy. Then you take your life. This is part of the contract with a person who is showing suicidal tendencies or feelings, images. The strongest example I have is in London years back. A woman came to me and she said, David, I want to have therapy with you. And I said, what is your main issue? She said, I want to kill myself and everyone is against me. This was the opening sentence of the first meeting.
Nice.
Nice. And the reason she wanted to kill herself was that her boyfriend had just jumped off the cliffs.
Jump up.
Off the cliffs. And he was one of 6 clients that year of another therapist, nothing to do with biosynthesis, who somehow was over giving the signal of your right to die. So 6 people had taken the message from the therapist, it's okay to die, and 6 clients of this therapist had gone. And if this client went to him, she would be the 7th, no doubt. So lucky she came to me instead. So here's a dramatic example of the wrong way to help the client to recognize the right to die. Then I said to this woman in the first meeting, I recognize completely your wish to die. But while you're alive, let's work. And then I suggested to her, because the reason she wanted to die was the loss of the boyfriend, she wanted to join him, I said, I'd like you to write him a letter. And if you're willing to send me a copy of this letter so I could tell you my feelings about it. So I had my session in London 2 weeks before the next session. And then in between came a letter to the boyfriend, maybe 1 or 2, and I would write back with my feelings as David about her feelings towards the boyfriend. So there was a contact circle. And then when we came to the next session, I could work with the body a little and talk about the boyfriend and the letters and so forth. And then she said, well, I won't kill myself yet. I wait a month. And then we went on with these letters, and then it became 3 months. And finally, she decided to live.
To live.
To live.
Yeah.
But it was a delicate process with these letters, and only a session every 2 weeks. And the strong wish to join the boyfriend, which was like a symbiosis, pulling her into the next dimension. So I had to work with the right to die, but the possibility to live.
Yeah. And what was the resource?
The resource was the letters.
Letters.
The letters of which she could write to him and then share, because he can't write back, and share what she had written with a third person who could give her some feelings, as me. Right?
Yeah.
It's a very tricky process, but that was the strongest I got with the suicide wish. First session, first sentence. Everyone is against me because I want to die.
Yeah.
Putting me in a position, if I'm against her wish to die, I'm the next enemy.
Yeah.
And if I'm with her wish to die, I could be like the other therapist.
Yeah, you will give her permission.
Yes, exactly. So I'm negotiating this very tricky space between the right to die, which everyone has, and the possibility to gain other resources which make it valuable to live. And that's what she did with me.
Yeah. Do you work with couples?
Very rarely. We sometimes had couples in the groups. So then we influence in the couple through the group, but we encourage the couple not to work together in the group. So they work with other groupings. So we've helped a lot of couples through the group work. But in individual therapy, I think I've hardly ever worked as a couples therapist. I don't think it's my skill. But some people we've trained work with couples on a very good.
Yeah.
And then they can use biosynthesis methods with the body signals and the body language to help deepen the contact in the couple. If they're working with the couple and one partner is talking to the other, then the biosynthesis therapist can use the body language to deepen the meaning of what's going on. Then the therapist is a translator between the couple. But it's not my particular skill. I haven't done that.
And do you work with group dynamic?
A group dynamic, yes. But the problem with group dynamic, our groups in our teaching groups are usually over 20, 24 is the standard. And that gives you maybe, what we said the other day, 600 different relationships. So you'd need most of the year to work with the dynamics in a group of 24 people.
Yeah.
People who really work with group dynamics will work with much smaller groups. If you work with 8, you still have 28. No, you certainly have 56 relationships still in a group of 8 people.
Yeah.
That's a lot. It's not my particular skill, but what we try to do in our groups is to work in a way that the contact with the deeper part of oneself, the heart contact, is nourished early in the group. And when the heart contact is developed enough in a group, the group dynamic, the difficult group dynamic goes much, much smaller. And then we work with the peer groups, and in the peer groups there may be a group dynamic, and then we can supervise that in the main training. But the classical form of group dynamics, encounter group style, is not our way of working. No, because it is partly too cathartic and partly needs maybe special skills which are not mine. But we have a good record for group dynamic history in our groups. Although we have big groups, we have had very little disturbing group dynamics over the years, much less, each year much less, because we get better at managing the flow between the people.
But does it mean that you create special atmosphere in order to avoid group dynamic?
Just a minute, that's a very interesting question. What do you mean by group dynamics, and why should we avoid it or not avoid it? What is for you group dynamic?
Well, when there are some conflict, when there are some person...
Yeah, but, okay, there's a conflict. But I just said in a group of 24 people, there could be, how many did I say? 600, 500 different conflicts possible. And how much time would you need to deal with that? You take the first one, you take the next one. To work with group dynamics effectively, you need small groups.
Yeah.
Basically, maximal 12, better 8. Then you can work with group dynamics. And then usually people who work with group dynamics are working with emotional expression between person A and person B. And you give time for this dynamic, like we give a little session, but it's not a couple session, it's not a single session, it's a dyad session, or maybe a triad session. And then you're getting into maybe you take an hour of time to resolve a conflict between 3 people for that day.
Yeah.
But then the other people think, oh, they've got that now, I need this too. And then you have the expectation, my feelings towards Catherine and Catherine's feelings towards George. But we have to make room for that in the group. And then theory goes out of the window. Individual bodywork goes out of the window.
Yeah.
It's a question of where you put your preference. But some people who work with group dynamic do so very effectively and help people, and that is their main tool. Our main tool is what you see in the training.
Yeah. Okay. How do you protect yourself from burning out?
Oh, good question. I like this question.
Burning out. Yeah.
Burning out is what happens when the therapist is too symbiotically identified with the depression or the bad problems, the traumas of the client. So if you get over-identified with a burnt-out client, you can have a burnt-out therapist. So this raises the question of mirror neurons and symbiosis and identification. And the opposite of that is disidentification and anti-mirror neurons in the brain. There are anti-mirror neurons which help you not to be identical with the other part. So sometimes the therapist is empathically identifying, sometimes he's disidentifying, coming back to himself and loosening himself from the identification with the burnout of the other person. So that's a complicated story about when to identify and when not, when to be in the mirror process, when not. Then the other way is to help the client to get out of his burnout.
Yeah.
And the opposite of burnout is light up. So when there is a burnout, it's like it's all gone. It's like in a forest when there's been a forest fire. It's gone black. So you can't undo the burnt out forest, but you can try and protect the forest that's still alive. And then maybe you don't need a match, because a match could be dangerous in a forest.
Yeah.
But you need a torch. And you can go into the forest with a torch. And you can light up the forest without burning the trees. So light up is the process of hope, inspiration, resource, we talked about earlier. That in the therapist himself and in the client. So the therapist's own light up is trying to stimulate the client's light up. And we have the metaphor of the problems are like the ash on top of the flame, on top of the fire.
Yeah.
So you can't see the fire, you only see the ash, and that is burnout. But the fire is actually there underneath. If it's not there, the client's dead, and then he's not in therapy. So there'll always be a flame of hope under the ash of the problems. And then you're trying to take away the ash carefully so you don't put out the fire. Yes, exactly. Carefully. You don't blow out the flame. Or you don't bury the flame, put it out under pushing the problems around.
Yeah.
You very carefully loosening the problems so the flame gets more visible. And then the client gets more hope. He starts to light up and you get more hope. If you don't succeed, the client is too resistant, then your tendency will be to feel hopeless.
Yeah.
And then you need to go through the process of disidentification. I did what I could, now it's up to him. I help him next time, it's still up to him or her. And what do I need for me now after the session? And maybe it's important that the therapist, if he's got 20 clients, doesn't have 20 burned out clients. Maybe you can get a selection.
Yeah.
Selection. Maybe some clients are traumatized and other clients is a different kind of history, and some is maybe long term and some are short term. Try and get a balance so you haven't got too many clients with the same. Let's say, if you're a therapist, you don't want 20 depressives.
Yeah, hopefully.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
If you're a group leader and you're working in an alcoholic center for alcoholics or drug addicts,
Yeah.
then there is a big risk of burnout.
Yeah.
Because you've got a whole lot of people with the same problem, and you've got group time and not individual time, which makes it harder to work.
Yeah.
And then it's like working on the coal face. And we had many people who worked with drug addicts or alcoholics in a center, and maybe 5 years, and then they had enough. And then they changed, gave up the job, did something else with normal clients. So it's a question of self-protection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know, we know that you are writing a book. When?
Three books.
When we can read them?
When they're finished.
So.
One book is on trauma.
Trauma?
Trauma. It needs revising. It's written, about 12 chapters, it needs revising. One book is on biosynthesis. It has 7 chapters, one for each life field. That's about 500 pages. That's massive. That's got to, needs 1 more year, I think, working on, and then it can start to go to the publisher. The third book is more on the basics of body psychotherapy and biosynthesis. What is the aura? What is meditation? What is character? What are life fields? It's more basics.
Yeah.
What is psychosomatic?
It will be like a textbook.
That's more like a textbook, I'm not sure. One is more like a foundation book about the body, the mind, the soul, what we talked about yesterday. The other book is a theory and practice book about biosynthesis. And the third book is about trauma. So you have to be patient. But on the acts and scenes model, I'm in Act 6, so I mustn't take too long. And you're in a younger act, so you will get it sooner or later. Okay. It's a life's work, end of a life's work for me to complete this. And then, of course, it will come out first in English, which is okay for you. And then it's got to be translated. The translation has to be checked. That will be quite a process. And then it will come in German. Once it's in English, it can go to Portugal and somebody can translate it to Portuguese. But translating, it's altogether, it's about 1,000 pages. Translating 1,000 pages is not happening in one night.
Sure.
But the English version should be available of at least one of these, maybe in 2 years' time. It's starting to move. Yeah. The main work of the writing is off my back now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the last question.
Another question.
Last question. How do you rest?
How do I rest?
Yeah.
How do I rest?
Do you have any hobby or
yes,
your favorite time?
Yes. How do I rest? I rest my body by lying down. And now I'm getting older, I take a rest midday, which I never did before. And this feels very good. It's just about an hour, and I usually sleep in that hour. And that's very good for me, and I have a feeling each hour I sleep gives me an extra day of life. So I feel very good with this short sleep midday, but it's out of my character. It's totally out of my character. Mentally, how do I relax? By doing what I like to do. So read a new book, or look at a new film, or have a new conversation, have an interview. This is relaxing. Take a walk in the sun. Do what somebody was talking yesterday about, in this group, about what I need, what I want. Who was this? You were there. What I need, what I want. Was it Yogi? What I need? Vani. What I need, what I want, what I must.
Yeah.
Right. So I try to get less of what I must, more of what I need, and more of what I want.
Yeah.
And I'm succeeding.
What?
I'm succeeding. So we have a very good balance. Now I have a very good balance between hours I work, hours of relaxation and so forth. It's very good for me. I'm having enough rest, enough nourishment, enough. Yeah, it's going well. But what if I tell you, when I was in London, I used to work in the school. I was a teacher, 5 hours a day, 5 days a week, 40 weeks a year, normal school, full time. Yeah. But on Saturday, I would work as a therapist. And I worked 12 hours.
Mm-hmm.
8 in the morning, 8 in the evening, no lunch.
Mm-hmm.
This was a lot. And now how did I relax with that? I came back on the train, 2.5 hours, had a lovely meal.
In the train?
In the train.
Yeah.
Sunday, no work, no therapy, no children. Monday, back with the children, a lovely rest from therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Saturday, away from the children, a lovely rest from children, for therapy. So the alternating was relaxing.
Yeah.
So I came fresh from the children to the therapy, and fresh from the therapy back to the children.
And then lovely meal in the train.
And then had a nice meal on the train, and Sunday was just for me and my family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was then, but that was a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. How's time? I think we're getting...
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vika, for very interesting questions. I hope very interesting answers.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Did you manage to translate? Because I was in a hurry.
It was fantastic.
Because I had a lot
of background. It was fantastic. I heard it in the background. You know, professional translators translate for 20 minutes and then stop. You did it for an hour. It's great.
Oh, thank you very much.
It's good.
Yeah.